Well, welcome back to my channel, and this is Blue. You're joined by Blue Rings, and today I'm gonna be reviewing one of my old Blue Life posts that I made a while back, and it is called the Prodigy Fallacy. Now, why are prodigies overrated? Right? Because I feel like in today's society, we have this wrong notion that you need to start things very early on. But the reality is that that's not necessarily true, you know. And essentially in this post, I unravel, the problem with the actual prodigies, right? I'm not saying that this is universally across the board, but a lot of the times, if we're being honest here, prodigies are overrated. Now let us examine slide 2. Putting kids through intense training early on causes them to peak early and plateau harder later on in life. It's pretty self-evident right there, is that, we'll have these kids that are very good at this one skill, right? Whether it's a sport, it's a game, like chess or whatever it is, right? Dancing, art, whatever it may be. This really applies a lot in something very physical, usually, but it is possible that I can translate into other things that can be more mental based, like chess. It's possible, right? And, on the third slide, we see an example. I'll just read it out. We see this phenomenon very prevalent in Muay Thai. The majority of Muay Thai fighters start very young as 5 years old. Due to this, they commonly retire as early as their 20s, rarely in their 30s. Now, if anyone knows anything about Muay Thai, right, and if you ever go to Thailand or even, just watch any young Thai fighters, I mean, they actually do start very young, 5 years old, right? But they end up retiring in their 20s, which is crazy, because they say that you hit your prime in sports in your 30s, so they retire like a whole decade earlier. So you see, the fact that they started this rigorous training in Muay Thai, it basically they might peak early, but you know what I mean? They also downfall early, too. Downfall is earlier, because, it's just so grueling, right? Your body just can't take it anymore. Especially at that young of an age, you just, your body's not used to it, right? You're not a grown-ass adult at this point. You're still a kid. And, in the fourth slide, you know what we do? We notice something. A very good example right here. Yeah. So the example that we see here is actually, it's a viral video that I actually remember watching, and I'm sure a lot of people watched, right? It's of this kid. His name is Rashad Mehdi. I think I pronounced that right. But basically, when he was around 13 to 16 years old, he became Naga champion, which, a lot of people say isn't that big of a deal. It's debatable because personally I have not done Naga, so I can't really say, but from what I've heard from other people, it can be kind of a shit show, you know what I mean? He was also a 2-time Muay Thai champion, right? Again, I'm not trying to be overcritical here, but against who? You know what I mean? At that young of an age, you're not going to find that many amazing competitors, if we're being honest here. He was also Grappler Quest champion, which, again, I don't really know too much about. I have heard of it, but basically a grappling champion that he was, probably in his weight class at the time, right? And I wrote here, at only 13 years of age, Rashad Mehdi is being overhyped as the next UFC champion, despite clearly slurring his words and So showing signs of CTE, right? And then we fast forward, 22 years old. This is basically modern day. He might be 23 now, but you know, he is 0-1 in MMA, and in boxing, he's kind of decent. I'll admit, 9-0 at boxing. You know, and what did I write below this? Never made it in MMA, despite being overworked by his father. Switches over to a new sport, not even being close to a world boxing championship. Right? It's like, I remember he was working so hard at a young age, and I remember watching that documentary, and I'm just like, you know, they were trying to make him seem like he was the next UFC champion in that movie. I mean, in that, like, documentary. And they had me fooled, honestly. They probably had, like, a bunch of people fooled. But then, like, I remember as I started training, you know, honestly, I'll be honest, like, that video might have been one of the reasons I started training. Not entirely, but one of the motivators, I would say. You know? And I remember, like, you know, maybe like years down the line, as I was training, I was like, wait, what happened to that kid? And, you know, eventually I did my research and found out. I mean, he didn't become as overhyped. He ended up becoming world champion. Maybe he can become a world champion in boxing, you know, maybe, but in MMA, he didn't really achieve that goal. I don't know if he ever will, but probably not, I would say. Again, on the next slide, we see an example. Due to being overworked and traumatized at a young age, this is him at age 6 compared to age 26. Richard Sandrak gave up on bodybuilding completely. And if you know the full story, which you could search up on Google, right? He was raised by a maniac of a father who basically forced him, you know, to work out like a lot. It's like insanely amount. And not even just work out, but like apparently, allegedly, there was some weird stuff you would probably put in the protein shakes. Probably PEDs or like, you know, steroids or something. And, you know, this kid would end up taking that. And it's a very sad story, if we're being honest here. I mean, look at him. Like, on the left side, he looks better than, like, 90%, 99% of adults, if we're being honest here. Then at 26, you know, because of him being so traumatized, you know, at a young age. Like, just look at that. Like, and, you know, I don't even blame the guy. Like, I mean, it's a very sad story, but you have to really look into it, you know. But, like, this is a very good example of why you should not push your kids so hard into whatever it is. You know what I mean? Do not push them, like, you know. It's more about having fun. Like, yes, don't, like, winning doesn't matter, don't get me wrong. But as a kid, not really, if we're being honest here. As an adult, yeah, it matters. But, you know, you have to make them love the game more than you love it, you know? Because if they love it more than you will, they will stick with the game longer than you will. You would have, you know what I mean? Again, next example. At 12 years old, Cody Paul became famous for his skills, you know? This was many years ago when this 12-year-old kid was very good at football, right? Then he went viral, you know? Literally viral. And it was like everywhere, this like 12-year-old kid is just like annihilating everyone. But what happened? At 22, he ended up playing football with Chadron State. Cody Paul became a YouTube sensation at 12 when he was annihilating kids in football. But clearly he wasn't able to keep up with his skills and ended his football career in college, never making it to the NFL. And now some people might say it's because maybe, you know, he might not have been as big. There's a bigger factor here, though. Again, Prodigy Fallacy. The assumption that someone is going to be good at a young age, that they will be good at a later age. But look, he peaked. I don't want to say he peaked at 12, but maybe like 15. you know. It may be 17, right? Clearly right before adulthood. Biggest mistake, you know. Again, he did not make it, unfortunately, into the NFL. Next example, basketball example. In 5th grade, he went viral for being a child prodigy with potential. His father overworked him into making 100 free throws, 200 floaters, and 200 jump shots every day. That is crazy to make a kid do that, especially in the 5th grade. Maybe like 50, I would say, is like okay, but 100, 200, and 200, bro, that's like 500 right there every day. No wonder this kid probably doesn't like basketball as much. Probably, you know, at least not as much as someone like, you know, the best. You know, but what happened to him? At 19, nobody wants to recruit him due to him being unathletic, ball hogging, and having a high ego. Clearly, it's not looking good for his career. Funny enough, I think he still plays. Julian Newman was the most marketed 12-year-old basketball player in the world. In 7th grade, he became the youngest player to score 1,000 varsity points, which is pretty impressive, I will admit. Yet wasn't able to live up to the hype when he got older, and won't get signed by the NBA. He couldn't live up to his potential when it mattered due to him peaking early. Again, it's a problem. What's the point of peaking, right, as a kid, when you don't peak as an adult? Right? Again, you know, like this kid, I mean, I shouldn't just say him, but like these prodigies, they essentially grow up with a high ego, and it makes sense, right? Because they're essentially beating everyone at their age, right? But those kids, they end up catching up, and once they catch up, you know, they end up getting surpassed, right? These prodigies, because they've been overworked, right? Whereas this new kid, right, who may not know that much about basketball, or like whatever sport it is, you know, he will end up surpassing him because he's fresh. He's fresh, right? His body's not deteriorated. It's not destroyed like this kid right here, or all those other kids that I just mentioned, right? And again, in my next slide, I just asked you this question: what good is it if a kid becomes champion when he can't be a champion as an adult when it matters? Just like with Rashad Mehdi, right? Cody Paul, Julian Newman, right? Overly injured plus overworked equals loss of passion. You know, this kid that insane, you know, routine, 100 free throws, 200 floaters, 200 jump shots every day. Yeah, you're gonna lose passion quickly. It doesn't matter how much. It's not even about being disciplined. You're just being overworked at that young of an age. As an adult, that would be fine, because from what I heard, Kobe would do some like insane work routine, right? But as an adult, you can actually handle it because your body is fully developed. But as a kid, it's not, right? So what is the conclusion of all this? Next slide, right? Kids should not be overworked in any craft if the goal is longevity. It's best to let them have fun and enjoy it, rather than make them suffer as youngsters, just for them to end up hating it as adults and give up on a passion that stole away their childhood. Just like that Richard Sandrick, the bodybuilder, right, child bodybuilder. Unfortunately, he ended up giving up on that dream. And again, I don't blame him, because every time he probably works out, he gets traumatized. It's unfortunate, because we know that fitness is very good for your health, right? And these sports activities are very good for your health. But again, too much of it as a child is devastating and catastrophic. And it can essentially just ruin your health overall, you know. And, you know, as a kid, you probably will have a lot of resentment, because it's usually it's the parents that are making their kids overwork, right? I mean, the kids don't probably have that much of a say in it, more than likely, right? So it's very unfortunate that these kids, are being forced. I remember even when I used to train at this one MMA gym. I won't mention names, but there was this one kid that would come into training, and just from his mood, I guess, you could just tell that it was so obvious he did not want to be there. And then I remember one day, his father walks in, and essentially, it's so obvious that his father is essentially making him do this, right? And it's just even though I personally love MMA, I wouldn't force someone to do it, especially at least the competition part. The training, yeah, sure. I mean, but again, you shouldn't over-obsess the kids with it. Your kids are not going to be obsessed with it as much as you probably will be, right? Nor should you try to, at least. Wait, there's a time and place. It's okay for kids to have fun when they're young, right? Have them attend it, on a, how do I say this? Have them attend it on a good, amount. Not don't overdo it, because they will end up disliking it, right? Right, I mean, there's no point in making your kids overworked. They will end up hating it, regardless of how fun the thing is. You know what I mean? Now I will read the caption. It's a long one, but bear with me. This fallacy assumes that you must be good just because you've been doing it since a young age. Prodigy fallacy, right? It also assumes that you aren't going to be good if you haven't been doing a craft since you were young. 2. It's basically 2 fallacies in one, right? What's interesting is that most prodigies get overworked at a young age, so much so that they gave up on their craft completely due to the fact that they lost interest in it entirely. Very common occurrence in prodigies. Prodigies are ill-prepared with the overworking attributes that destroy them physically and mentally. Their competitors start to catch up and surpass them because they haven't lost any passion. It just began, right? They're fresh. This is a new thing. It's like they just got their feet wet. You know why? It's essentially they are trying a new dish, essentially. The first time you try a new dish, of course, you're gonna like it. But, once you keep trying it, it gets boring, no matter how good it is. Think of the example of the rabbit versus the tortoise. The rabbit has a head start, but gets overly confident and takes a nap, and the tortoise surpasses it. Obviously, the famous story, right? Eventually, prodigies, they might be very good, but they end up getting surpassed eventually. At a young age, they're good, but as adults, they're not as good. Also because prodigies are more likely to be injured in sports especially, as we see Rashad Mehdi slurring his words at only 13 years old. I mean, at 13 years old, slurring your words, that is a big problem. Even in academics, we see highly gifted adolescents displaying high levels of depression and stress, which causes them to suffer and fail later on in life. We probably know a lot of kids, right? I'm sure you probably know. They were very good at school, at a young age, but unfortunately they don't get to that, level, I guess, later on in life. Because maybe their parents overworked them. You have to get good grades and whatnot. But then, of course, it's like they pushed it on them so much, they end up hating it. Again, they give up on it completely. And it's unfortunate because they end up hating their future. They end up killing it. This is obviously horrible for a child to get overworked at a young age. It is better to be good at 25 years old than to quit at 15 years old. Prodigies are known peak too early and fail later on when it matters in life, right? Yeah, like I said, like it's better to be amazing at 20, 30 years old than it is at 15. Because at 15 it doesn't really matter, right? As a kid it does not really matter. You know, I used to think it mattered. You know, I was like, I wish I was good at MMA at like, you know, like 16, 15, right? But I'm very glad that I'm good at it now, right? And that I am peaking, right? I'm getting better rather than worse. You know what I mean? It is better to be on the rise than on the fall, right? And Prodigies, unfortunately, just the way it is, tend to be on the fall, right? And now I'm not saying Prodigies can't be successful. The best example I can think of in sports probably is Khabib, right? His father. But you have to keep in mind the way the Russians train is very different from the way Americans train. They don't overwork. It's very technical, right? Yeah, I mean, I was actually doing some research on like Khabib and his like early life. His father was talking about, you know, he didn't really care that much about Khabib winning and losing, right? There was many instances where Khabib ended up, unfortunately, losing matches like in judo and wrestling, right, when he was like very young. But what did this do? This caused him to hate losing, not to hate the sport, not to hate combat sports, but to hate losing, right, inadvertently, to the point he's like, you know what, I'm never gonna lose, and he ends up retiring undefeated, right? Look at that. I mean, he's probably the best example against the Prodigy Fallacy, but there's a reason. You know, the Russians train very smart, unlike in America, where they will put kids into wrestling camps and overwork them. And I've seen this firsthand, at least. When you go to like any wrestling tournament where, you know, young kids, or even in high school, they will overwork you so much to the point where you just hate it so much you don't want to go practice anymore. It becomes a burden, which is what it's not supposed to be. This is like the biggest problem. And you know, in America especially, right? I don't want to say the West, but like in America specifically, because of for some weird reason, this toughness culture is very prevalent. You know, ironically, we think of the Russians in America as tough, but the Russians actually view the Americans this way, funny enough, because the Russians, deep down, are very technical, right? In their sports. Very technical. Right, some of the best wrestlers in the world, right, and very good MMA fighters, of course, right, they're very technical. I mean, there's a reason why these dudes are able to, like, just, like, out-grapple the best, you know, in, like, everywhere. Like, not in just wrestling, but just grappling overall in jiu-jitsu, judo, right? And, it's just crazy, because Khabib is probably the only example, one of the few examples, actually, I shouldn't say the only, but one of the few examples where a prodigy could make it, but it has to be done right. The way his father did it was very correct. You know, and of course, like, not even just Khabib, but, you know, we have Islam Makhachev and the others, you know, in that whole, like, Russian squad, Dagestan squad, right? And, you know, like, the way his father did it, I honestly don't think there's anyone that could have done it better, you know? And it makes sense, I mean, you know, they're very smart with their training. You know, that is the only way if you want, you know, to have a good prodigy to be successful, not just in the short term. I mean, who cares about the short term anyways, but the long term. Not when he's 15, but when he's 20, 25, 30, right? As an adult, when it actually matters. You know, nobody, I mean, maybe it might go viral on YouTube, you know, 13-year-old kid beats 20-year-old kid, right? Or whatever. Right? Or 13-year-old dismantles another 13-year-old, right? But a 20-year-old will stick with it. And by the time he's 30, he will be better. Because that 13-year-old will end up quitting eventually. Probably, more than likely. Or he won't be as dedicated to it as much as he was before. Yeah. It's very unfortunate, but it's true. You know, and I hope you guys can see the wisdom behind everything what I just said. You know, prodigies, you know, and also this is another thing, you know, don't be discouraged just because you are entering something very late. You know, it's better, that's fine. That might even be better than entering it too early, you know. You know, it's just being consistent, you know, and not losing passion, right? That's the end all be all. Don't overwork yourself, don't injure yourself, and you won't lose the passion, right? I don't want to say it's easier said than done, but if you're smart about it, then it is easy, right? Think with your head, not with your fist. Until next time, well, before that, like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum.